And welcome back. We are going to go ahead and build on what we established last time, which was the if statement, by expanding it into what is known as an if-else statement. Now, when we previously discussed our branching statements, we had said that, hey, you know what, we can test a condition using an if statement. For example, if we want to say like when a number is positive, such as greater than 0, or we can say like if num is greater than 0, it's a great way for us to kind of find it and determine a value. However, what if I said I want to test to see if a number is not just positive, but I want to see, well, if it's a positive number or a negative number. For example, if it's a positive number, I want it to be like, yay, things are great. Or if it's a negative number, I'm like, oh no, these things are kind of bad. Things like that. Maybe I'm doing a temperature thing, like, hey, it's above 0, it's not freezing. If it's negative, oh, it's below 0, things are going to get kind of cold around here. So these are, again, great ways for us to kind of expand our thinking about what we want to do, but how do we actually go about implementing that? Well, this is going to require us to add another step to our branching statements, which is what is known as an else statement. So if we look at some more example if statements here, we're going to expand these out now to have an else. So for example, we have if hours is greater than 40, we say pay is equal to rate times 40 plus 1.5 times rate times hours minus 40. Oh, this looks like a good formula for calculating overtime. Awesome. Well, what happens if you don't have overtime? Well, that's what else is going to be for. Else, pay is equal to rate times hours. Let's look at another one. If x is less than 5, we could just say hey, x is less than 5. Well, what's if it's, let's say 6? Well, 6 is not less than 5, so what do we want it to say? Well, the value is 5 or greater. Perfect. Is again a great way to give us some feedback, give us some information about what is actually happening here with this variable. Now, one thing I want to stress here is, even though it's a pretty simple code to be able to implement, first thing I want you to understand that the else is not always necessary. The else block, if you notice, it's very similar to how we format our if statements. So we're going to have the same kind of formatting where the stuff inside is tabbed over, or we're going to have curly brackets. All that stuff is still the same. But if you notice, last time we had just an if block. We didn't have an else block. Whereas now we have an else block, which tells us the else's are not always needed. Sometimes we don't need an else conditional. Sometimes we're only just checking for if. Now, you may be interested in testing, for example, just one condition, and you don't care about what the other values do. It has no relevance for what your program needs to execute. For example, let's just say you're testing to see if a count, you're just adding numbers, and you're waiting to see if it reaches 100. Okay, well, we are only interested really in that point at the if part. Like when it reaches 100, stop the program. Perfect. We don't really care with the else part. Like, sure, there might be things that can happen with that else, but in this case, we don't really need the else, so we can just omit that. And what else may not always be needed? The if part is always going to be required when using a conditional branching statement here. So we're always going to have that if part. Again, we may not have else, but we're always going to have an if. Now, another thing to note is that there is no Boolean expression for else. A common mistake for first-time programmers is they try to add a Boolean expression to the else statement. Now, if you try to do this, like say like x is, if we go back to our positive negative example, we say, okay, for ifs, if x is greater than 0, it's positive. If x is less than 0, it's negative. You try to say else x is less than 0, we're getting an error. Why are we getting an error? Well, that's because the else statement is kind of a catch-all bucket, so to speak. Instead of trying to list the opposite of whatever we're testing in the if, the else is actually just going to run code for anything that is false for the if, which can come in really handy because if we have more than one if thing that we want to test, and we'll talk about this later on, the else bucket is really a nice way for us to kind of encapsulate all these different scenarios without having to list them out. And as we start building much more complex branching statements, you're going to really see how this works to else really, really handily. All right, so here we are in a code. I went ahead and copied over the program I made from before, and I want to go ahead and add some else statements to it to go ahead and show you just how easy it is to add these in here. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to my first if block here, and I'm just going to go to my end curly bracket and just hit enter, and I'm going to type else. Now, again, if I try to put in something here, you can see if I start saying like if num1 is, let's say, less than num2, and I do curly brackets, all right, notice as soon as I hit save, we have a red squiggle line. Why do we have a red squiggle line here? Well, it's because this part right here doesn't need to happen for else. So if we remove that, and you notice it no longer is complaining. So this is awesome. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, paste this print line statement down here. So we hit it has to be greater than, let's just leave this as greater than, update this, or equal to num2. And we'll say, well, if it's not greater than or equal to, well, it has to be less than. All right, so those are our two possibilities here. And I'm just going to go ahead and adjust this so we can make sure we hit this if statement here. So we want to make sure that this is appropriate. So I'm going to make 1 and 5 because now that won't hit that first one. And let's go ahead and have our user input. Let's go ahead and add a else statement in here. So I'm going to say else, and let's just say user num1 is greater than or equal to. Oh wait, what did we forget? We forgot that an else statement doesn't need that. So again, we can just jump right to those curly brackets. Boom. So again, quick reminder there how that happens. So we started getting the mode. We're like, oh, we're going to type this in. No, we don't need that. Again, else statements don't need a Boolean expression. So we can jump right into our system.out.println. And let's go ahead and have this just go ahead and say something like, let's just say user num1 is greater than user num2. Add a semicolon here. And let's go ahead and add another print line statement, because this is something I haven't shown yet, but you can actually put multiple print line statements or multiple different lines of code of what you want to have happen inside here. So we're going to say user num, I'm going to say or user num1 is equal to user num2. Perfect. All right. So that's going to give us a quick test there. So we're going to say it's greater than or it's equal to. Perfect. And so now that these are set up, let's go ahead and just run this real quick. And we're going to enter in two numbers. Let's do 5 and 4. So we're going to reverse what we did last time. So testing for inequality, num1 is less than num2. Perfect. That's what we have right here in our else. User num1 is greater than user num2. And then we get the or user num1 is equal to user num2. Perfect. And just like that, we've gone ahead and created our else statement. And again, just like I showed, you can put multiple things here. In fact, I can do whole different things in here. So for example, I could come in here and say, let's say we do num1 is equal to user num1 plus num1. We can do other operations in here too. So it's not limited with that. And anything I do inside the else statement, and we just print out num1, is only going to happen if this is true. So I'm going to rerun this just to show you here real quick. So we're going to enter our two numbers. Let's do this with 4 and 5 this time, okay? So, or 5 and 4 is what we did, right? 4 from 4, boom, we get 6. And of course, because we had before num1 is 1, and we typed in 5 as our first number, we then get 1 plus 5, which is 6. But if I go ahead and reverse that, let's do 4 and 5. Now we get 1. And you notice we have less output here because, again, this operation only happens here in this else. If I want this to happen in both, I would have to add it to both. Or if I only wanted to happen in the if statement, I would have to put it in the if statement.